So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Dario's expert webinar series titled Back to the Office Boot Camp. This is the third session. I am sure we will have several more, but it is the third session of our first three-part series. I'm Carol Newjane, Vice President of Employer Sales for Dario Health, and your host for today. Some logistics before we get started. We will follow up with this recording after our conversation for all of those that registered. Also, please feel free, and I implore you to ask questions throughout this conversation. We have a really wonderful expert who is available to us for the next hour or so. And this is a wonderful opportunity to ask questions as to what's happening in the market, where we see the market going, and things of that nature. So as those of you who have joined us in the past know, throughout these webinars, we really have been aiming to offer perspective, data insights, trends, and really actionable thought leadership, with the ultimate goal of being as prepared as we can be at this point for the ongoing changes that we're seeing in our world, our new normal, and the needs that we are seeing within our employees and their families. The complexities and the nuances of the return to office have really been on everyone's minds, frankly, because they are changing every single day. We think we know what's happening one day, and then the next day something changes. And folks are struggling with, how do we transition employees from home offices, from hybrid models, from other unusual working scenarios after 18 months of pandemic life. And that it is on us to take into consideration all aspects of an employee and their family's well-being. So physical, social, financial, mental health, and really the effects on the family in its entirety. Our final webinar today explores the consequences of a year that took an enormous toll on the physical health of people around the world. The CDC estimates that about 41% of Americans avoided care due to the pandemic. There was an unprecedented amount of medical care that was missed. And that's really for people across the risk spectrum. So both those that are healthy and those with existing conditions, folks avoided care. And the implications are still being uncovered as we move towards a return to normal healthcare behaviors slowly. In today's session, we're going to hopefully help you prepare for a year that, again, will not be normal, and that will have lingering health impacts for employees. And hopefully through that process, it'll not only allow us to rebound from what happened last year, but also help us to prepare so that we don't have to struggle the next time something this big happens. We want to be able to situate an employee experience that can pivot regardless of where the member is and regardless of what's happening in the world. So to that end, today with us is Dario's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Omar Manejwala. He will walk us through the impact of the pandemic on healthcare utilization and the things I just discussed. So Dr. Omar, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Carol. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm Omar Manejwala. As Carol mentioned, I'm a psychiatrist. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Dario Health. I've spent the better part of the last decade designing and commercializing clinical product at scale to improve health, reduce costs. And some of the programs I've developed have been adopted and are being used by many of the nation's largest payers and employers. In March of 2020, I joined Dario Health to make behavior change in chronic disease the path of least resistance. In other words, to make the right thing to do the easy thing to do. And I want to start today by really recognizing you, by recognizing all of you for committing your time, your attention to this topic today. 1 year later and 1 year sicker, it really speaks to your interest in understanding and really leading in the area of where we are in terms of the health of folks, their utilization of care, and in particular, what's coming next? How can you best prepare to address this coming wave of healthcare use, especially acute care use? And we'll talk a little bit about how the last 18 months have accelerated the adoption of certain technologies, how those newer technologies offer some very interesting and unique advantages over simple telehealth, and how the lane has really been opened up, if you will, to use technology at scale to solve some of these areas, to achieve some clinical and financial outcomes that were really never before possible for employers, and especially in the face of return to in-person, as Carol mentioned, are needed now more than ever. Right? I'd also like to just take a minute and point out the obvious, which is that I'm joined today by one of the sharpest minds in the employer health space. That's Carol New-James. She has a deep background. If you don't know her, she has a deep background. 4 years at Optum. She was a strategic client executive, 15 years at Mercer as a principal, and before that at Lockton. So I really think we're in for a great, very intimate conversation here on where we are, what we expect as employees return to workplace in different ways. And people are going back in different ways. As Carol mentioned, there's a lot, sometimes there can be confusion. Things happen a certain way, then they change. That produces stress. So I'm going to start with a few slides, kind of just some remarks walking through, what do we know? What do we expect? And then open it up for a conversation with you, with Carol, myself. Those of you who have questions, as she mentioned, would love to hear them. And everyone likes to say that one size does not fit all in healthcare. I mean, this has become at this point, it's a tired refrain, you might say. We've said that for some time, and yet if you look at the ecosystem, survey the landscape, you find that most solutions are still either one size fits all, or maybe there are a few sizes fits all. As we look at the topic of avoidance of care and return to the workplace for many of our employees, I think it's important to note that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to return to work either. And we're already seeing return to work taking different shapes, different forms, disparate approaches for various work functions, blue collar, white collar, different cultures. We also see a wide range of leadership styles. Those are making an impact on what exactly those returns are going to look like across companies. And as we see employers calling folks back into the office, we're doing so in an environment where, and some of you may have actually seen the MMWR that Carol pointed out, that estimated 41% of US adults delayed or avoided medical care during the pandemic. That same study showed that delayed and avoided care was more common among people with 2 or more chronic conditions. So you can think about the impacts of that. The same study showed that racial disparities were present in the avoidance of care, increased care avoidance during that time for Black and for Hispanic adults, and nearly 1 in 3 adults were skipping their routine care as well. So, return to work, whatever form that ends up taking, you're going to see employees with more advanced chronic disease burden, advanced mental health burden. We're going to see stresses related to commuting back and forth to work, reentry into environments they hadn't seen for a year and a half. For some people, they'd never seen those environments at all. And as we talk to the risk holders for healthcare, we know they're expecting utilization to shift, in some cases quite dramatically, and they're looking to stay ahead when it comes to chronic conditions, especially for those people with multiple chronic conditions, which I think all of us here today probably know that multiple conditions are really the norm and not the exception for people who have chronic conditions. And so, now more than ever, the ability to help people change their behaviors, to help with habit formation, really engage people in approaches that are really highly personalized, very flexible. Those are all going to be very important if we're going to bend these chronic conditions. Now, chronic conditions have many drivers. We know that. There's genetics, there's social determinants. But even when there's other factors at play, behaviors, the things we do, they play an outsized role in chronic condition outcomes. Behaviors are the proximal cause of ER visits, of inpatient stays, and even of needing more expensive pharma requirements. So behavior change needs to become an even greater focus now as we look to re-enter in this environment. But in all this mess, in the pandemic, in the pain of all of this, there has at the same time been a positive that's emerged. And that's that people have developed an increased willingness to engage in care through technology. They've shown that. And many of these folks were the very same people that folks were saying, there's no way they're going to adopt to technology. There's no way they're going to adapt technology. And they did. And that's kind of that's been the nature of technology. It surprises us at every turn. And we saw that first with telehealth, and really high adoption of telehealth among people that we did not expect to adopt telehealth. We saw that first. And with telehealth visits, they went up. And maybe we thought they didn't have the technology facility that they needed. Maybe we assumed that because they weren't digital natives, they wouldn't engage, but they did. and they did in vast numbers, especially early in the pandemic. We saw smartphone usage increase, even among people that we thought weren't going to use smartphones. We saw people who couldn't get care in person be open to changing the site of care. That's what telehealth is. It's changing the location of care. And I think it's important to also note, as great as telehealth has been, it hasn't really appreciably changed in the last 30 years. We're going to be honest with ourselves. We're doing more of it, but telehealth is, for the most part, what it has been. It's changing the site of care, the location of care. It's not really changing the nature of care, the kind of care that people are getting. And so perhaps you saw the study results from yesterday that was put out by CLASS and the Center for Connected Medicine. It showed that telehealth visits, they spiked up, but now they account for fewer than 20% of the visits for hospital-based clinics. That's a significant downturn from the pandemic highs. That was in June, pre-Delta variant. So we're expecting to see a bump here, but we know that that's flexible, that's adaptive, because if you're a person who needs to get care and you have to get it telehealth, and you want to get it, you can. And if you want to get it brick and mortar, you can. So you can move between those, access the same value in a different location of care. But telehealth is episodic care. And episodic care, it's periodic, and that can't solve the problem. I think most people realize that if you double or triple the number of physician visits, or you increase the number of provider visits, you're not going to solve chronic disease. It's not like we have worsening diabetes and chronic pain because people who are seeing their doctor aren't seeing their doctor enough. Of course, we do need that care. It's very important for providers to guide us through those kinds of conditions. But what's really needed are habits, habit change, behavior change. And the docs themselves will tell you that. As a psychiatrist, I'll tell you that. We need to change the 99.9% of our lives that are spent outside of the doctor's visit. Now, regardless of whether that visit happens to be telephonic, or maybe it's video, or maybe it's brick and mortar. So we need support where we live throughout the day across a range of conditions and behaviors. That's how we're going to get there. And so, as I mentioned, people really need care, and the convenient site of care that telehealth offers is a great thing. That's awesome. It was great that we got to see more of it. But helping people improve their health, that requires solutions that are convenient, that are easy to use, that support them between their doctor's visits, especially as our lives are shifting. Our lives have shifted tremendously during this period, and they're about to shift again as many people return to more traditional work lives. I think the important point here is that digital therapeutics are changing the nature of care. And if they're focused on behaviors, if they're dynamically personalized, if they're multi-condition and not just a point solution, if they're designed natively to share data, to put data and intelligence in the time, place, format, frequency that makes sense to partners, that makes sense to customers and third-party solutions, that can really drive significant outcome, financial outcomes, clinical outcomes. And these are outcomes that just simply are not accessible by telehealth or brick and mortar health. Changing the site of care does not allow you to access that or unlock that kind of deeper outcomes and really to do so at scale with ROI, with measurable kinds of ROI as well. And so after a year, and really more than a year, in which work and health became deeply intertwined for people, expectations are shifting. There's a bit of heterogeneity here. There's a lot of complexity here in terms of what we're seeing trend-wise. But in general, we're seeing people are looking to employers to own more responsibility for employee health, to provide support outside the doctor's visit in ways that make sense for them, in ways that will drive clinical outcomes, in ways that are really personalized to them. Now, one example of that, mental health care. We look back over this last year and a half, we saw an increase in conditions, increase in demand for services, some reduction in stigma and shame. That was a good thing. But the question remained, does everyone who has a mental health condition need to see a psychiatrist? I'm a psychiatrist. I'll tell you that the answer is no. That is not true. And there aren't enough psychiatrists anyway, even if it were. So that's not efficient. That's not matching. So that's not a scalable solution. Not everybody wants that. So we really have seen a shift also towards this idea of let's optimize the care. Let's match the care. Let's get the right people to the right types of care. Self-management, digital plus coaching for those who need telehealth. And if you need specialty care, fine, you get specialty care, but really making sure that we optimize that. And if you consider all these kinds of shifts, these expectation shifts, and you put them in context, with a really tight job market, it becomes very clear that employers are going to need to be more proactive about the health benefits that they offer. And this is a unique moment because as these expectations are shifting now, there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity for employers to lead in value creation, in solutions that are scalable, in solutions that deliver a very real, very measurable kinds of ROI. And so what we see is that, with those solutions now available, what we're hearing is that employers are asking themselves this question, where do we want to be on the curve? And taken in context, it's more than just attractive benefits offerings for potential employees this year. It's going to require adapting to a new landscape, more flexible and responsive healthcare solutions. And look, in some cases, that may even be off cycle. I think most of us know it's okay to be off cycle if it's solving for an urgent need or a dramatic shift in the environment, which is exactly what we're facing now with the coming wave of utilization, the implications of deferred chronic condition care. We're seeing some folks actually going for these solutions off cycle. So, I'll leave you with these kind of three key ideas as we move forward. What are we going to see here? And then I think we can open it up for a nice conversation, discussion. As you look towards 2022, these are the areas I think to be paying attention to. First, I think most of you see this already. Episodic care just isn't working anymore. People need support between the visits. They need it in a way that's clinically validated. They need it in a way that's rigorously tested. They need it in a way that's market validated. They need solutions that don't just work in the ivory tower, but they work in the real world. They produce engagement. They drive value between the visits, measurable clinical outcomes across a range of conditions. And that's really important. We're hearing that the point solution is not going to be the investment as we move forward here. Second, and I think this is really clear, telehealth is just not going to get us there. Telehealth is great. Telehealth is about changing the site of care, and that's important. That's going to go up. It's going to come down. Over time, it's going to grow. Over time, it's going to consume more. There will be some flexibility as we move in and out of variants and move in and out of return. But as I mentioned, telehealth is about changing the site of care. Digital therapeutics are really changing the nature of care, the kind of support, unlocking a degree of value that comes from people's behaviors that can't be done, in office. This is a reason why providers themselves are looking for this to help people make the kinds of changes that they've been asking folks to make for decades, really. And that's now finally can be unlocked. And then finally, I would say, flexibility is going to be absolutely key. Benefits need that flexibility. Return to work, the coming wave of utilization is going to show up in different ways for different populations, for sure. And we're going to see a range here. But what we are seeing is that people are sicker. People are sicker. They're moving less. They have deferred maintenance care. They even avoided going, in some cases, to urgent care, which now may lead to more emergent care. As acute care hospitalization, we're going to see people needing much more expensive third-tier kind of pharma. There's a lot of cost to the system that's going to show up in direct, measurable healthcare utilization. I'm not talking about the softer stuff, and there will be that too. But I'm talking about measurable kinds of increases. There has to be flexibility to adapt. But for those who do, for those who are able to access these kinds of solutions, there's going to be ability to create significant advantage in utilization, advantage in employee experience, advantage in benefits. So now, I'll turn it back to Carol, and Carol, who comes from our employer side, sales side, can moderate some of these questions and kind of open it up for a broader discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Omar. That was great. So let's start off with a few questions, and I'll start reading them as they come in. So, knowing that technology is going to really help us bridge a gap in some capacity, right? And that honestly, we need to embrace it in order to be able to rebound from the past 18 months and to be better prepared in the future. What are your thoughts on populations or buyers or a leadership that have a population where perhaps historically has not been huge technology users?
Yeah, that's a great question. And every year we get the Marinica report and other reports that look at the trends around the utilization of technology. Look, there are still some folks that don't have access to this kind of technology. So I think it's some folks may not have a smartphone, for example. Some folks may not have access to high-speed internet. We're seeing very rapid adoption of smartphone technology. We're seeing the idea of broadband access as a social determinant of health. But we also need to look for solutions that can work asynchronously. And we've got many folks out there, what they're using is really old smartphones, a kind of iPhones going back to the ones with the headphone jacks and old Android phones. So looking for solutions which are backwards compatible to the oldest technology. That's pretty rare. So look for solutions that are really investing in maintaining that backwards compatibility. Look for solutions that can be deployed asynchronously. So, we've got a lot of members, for example, just at Dario, we've got a lot of members who their way of using the solution is they get internet access at the Wendy's, at the Walmart. And is your user journey designed so that it can flex with you in that way, or does it require continuous high-speed broadband kind of? That's not going to work for a lot of these populations. At the same time, looking at older adults, almost a third of our users are over the age of 65. As you look to partners in this space, ask the questions, are these populations using the technology? What are the outcomes in those subpopulations of these technologies? We've got 1 in 5 Dario users is from a low socioeconomic status. So I think it's very important, no matter who you go with in this space, looking at those outcomes in the subpopulation, recognizing that we're getting very rapid adoption of smartphone and internet technologies, but looking for solutions that work even when that's not the case. That's what I would say. Yeah.
And Dr. Omar, I think a lot of people will surprise you too. You have, I'll share my dad as an example. He's an immigrant. He's been here for 30 years. English is his third language. We just taught him how to text. He doesn't know how to respond to group texts yet. And I really thought that something like our glucometer and our app would be really, really difficult for him. But as a diabetic, he's just taken it on and he loves it. And he walks around the bakery. I know he shouldn't be working in a bakery, but he walks around the bakery and he's just showing this to his brothers. And he's like, look, you put it in here and it goes on your phone. So I think people will generally surprise you, even if they are not huge technology users. When something works, it works. And if it's meeting them where they need to be, then they will show up for it. So I think that's really crucial.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Look, innovation, even outside of healthcare, just innovation in general has been about convenience, simplicity, and driving value. Simply, conveniently, and quickly. And so any technology that does that is going to gain pretty rapid adoption, especially if the user journeys, the experience is really designed to be simple and easy to use. Yeah.
You had mentioned about comorbidities, and I'm always interested in that because frankly, nothing happens in a vacuum. How important are the solutions that are able to bridge that gap for folks? And really, regardless of what component of a member's well-being needs to be addressed, they can show up for them.
Yeah, I would say that there's really 3 tiers here when you look at this. So there's point solutions, and clearly we're hearing from the space that this is exhausting. Multi-vendor management, point solutions, small engagement, that cannot be the future. And so at the same time, we see a lot of acquisition and stuff going on in that space too. But in general, I think there are so few people that have just one condition, and even if you did just have one condition, it just doesn't make sense to deploy a solution in case you develop another condition to be point. Then there's the second tier, I would say, where they offer a range of solutions for various conditions, but it's not really integrated on a seamless user journey, integrated data set, and an ability to take, say, your insights from your experience with diabetes and apply them to improving your musculoskeletal health, apply those same insights to improving your behavioral health in a personalized way. So it's not just that I'm offering you the kitchen sink of various solutions, but the insights are personalized between these conditions. They sit on an integrated data set. They sit on an integrated user journey engine. And the second tier doesn't have that. So they may be deploying multiple conditions. These are many examples of this. And then I would say the third tier are the ones that really can personalize, that can integrate insights across conditions, behavioral insights, clinical insights, utilization and engagement insights across conditions. That's the unicorn. So that's what I would say. It's really important to look for that because, at the end of the day, if you did have diabetes and musculoskeletal, do you really want 2 separate coaches? Do you really want 2 separate user experiences and 2 separate if I already explained something to you, if you already know how I like to engage over here, why can't you just use this over here so that it can all be kind of interconnected? And that's what that's what users are asking for, members, employees. That's also what employers are demanding. And unfortunately, that's in short supply.
And what are your thoughts on either presenting these types of solutions for just those with chronic conditions, or really casting a wide net and presenting well-being solutions so that you can engage all types of members as opposed to those that are just what we define as sick?
I think that's a great question. For a long time, I think in general in this space, people have been pushing this idea, go upstream, help people earlier, prevent these conditions from occurring. But then the ROI was questionable for a lot of those kinds of areas. And so people are like, okay, what do we do here? But now with technology and digital therapeutics, there's an ability to offer population-based strategies upstream earlier in the condition in a way that's highly scalable, in a way that's very inexpensive, can drive ROI and really have a seamless experience, so that if you're way up here and you're just pre versus early versus medium and more, you can actually do all of that on the same platform and prevent some of these people from getting sick. You could do so in a way that's scalable, and I think very important, you could do so in a way that's generating value, because technology lets you unlock that in a way that we couldn't just a few years ago.
And the other piece that I know is close to your heart, and it's one of the reasons that I am at Dario, is the importance of AI, and not in sort of the buzzword way that we've heard it being used, but how is it that you think it could be best used?
Yeah, this is a great question. So, and look, there's a lot of buzz around this. There's a lot of hype around AI. Everybody wants to be AI. Everybody says they're AI. I encourage you to look under the hood as you're evaluating solutions in this space. Take a look, what does it actually show up as? And if you look at most first generation digital health solutions, it looks something like this. If they're using it, if they're actually using it, generally it looks like identify some personas, do some persona matching, design some user journeys that match to each persona, and then do some manual adjustment of that over time as you learn more. And that's a requirement. You have to start there. But people change too much. There's too much intrapersonal change over time. So only solutions that, and by the way, because people change, that's why people drop out of solutions. So only AI-driven approaches that apply directly to the journey engine that can personalize user journeys and user experiences around things like, what's the best time for a message? What's the best tone? What's the best content? Intervention, what frequency should I get it at? All these kinds of concepts, and not just setting a persona for them, but dynamically adapting them, not manually, but dynamically adapting those things, using the AI to really personalize the journey for the user. That really drives retention. So I think, now is the time for especially employers to be looking to who is adapting these journeys over time, who's driving real engagement. Now, what percentage of your users that come in at the beginning are still using it at the end? And digital health has suffered badly on that question. It has not performed well. So for those solutions that are standing out and driving engagement long-term, and having people still use the platform across conditions, that's, I think, where the success will be. That should be focused on.
And I think that there are two components in that that are crucial in the way we use AI. One is we need to, and I've had a wonderful, very, very smart, sharp mind once say to me, it's not what's the matter with people, but what matters to them. And I know you've said that, and it really resonates for a lot of people that I repeat it to, because somebody can be extremely diabetic, and if that's not where they want to concentrate right now, if there's no propensity to engage, that perhaps may not be the way to engage with them. That's crucial. And I think the other piece of it is we need to be really cognizant how we're building our AI. There are things that skew AIs, whether it's cost or utilization. And we need to make sure that we are building an AI that responds to individuals' behavior as opposed to trends that we are seeing based on accuracy and access and affordability and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. The AI is only as good as the data that feed it, especially the longitudinal and breadth of that data. Dar's been collecting this for 10 years now. And it's like the old joke says, how long does it take to find out if you have a side effect 6 months after the medicine? Well, at least 6 months. So if you want to know, how are people going to engage at a year, at 2 years going out, you need solutions that have been around collecting and building these. So you need that longitudinal data, you need the breadth of the data, and then also AI is only as good as the experts who annotate that data. And that's really important too. And looking for biases and making sure that we're focusing on that. And to your other point about what matters to people being often far more important than what's the matter with people, it's not just a question of not getting engagement. But if you're a point solution and you're just hammering on diabetes, and you're nudging and messaging and frankly annoying someone with a condition, it's not just that they're not going to engage. It's going to produce a negative engagement. It's going to be friction. It's going to be complaints. They're actually going to expend extra effort of their lives, time and energy that they don't have to delete that app and complain. And that's not what you want. What you want is someone who says, okay, fine, that's not what you want. Let's focus on it. What is of value to you? And designing and solutions that really produce a collaboration, low friction engagement. And that's, unfortunately, I said that's really not the norm in this space. And so those solutions that are really focusing on that kind of multi-condition, integrated, low friction kind of approach, collaborative approach that really focuses on what's important to people, those are the unicorns.
So if you had one thing for our listeners today to walk away with in terms of how do they go back to their respective offices and bring their populations what their populations need, and also bring a narrative back to leadership to convince them of what needs to be done, what would you think those few things are?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'm sure that many people are asking that right now at this moment. As they look at the landscape. I would say certainly multi-condition is just, that's the minimum. I think people have basically stopped looking at point. It's just too exhausting. So multi-condition, integrated. Are we just offering you multiple conditions because we bought a few companies that offer that, or is this an integrated approach here? And for a long time, the trade-off was between, okay, a platform, which is broad and a lot of conditions, but not a lot of depth because you're not producing clinical outcomes, not published studies, or really, really good point solutions, but no talking to others. Walled gardens, don't play well in the sandbox with others. And so I would say, the take back here is multi-condition, plays well with others, native capability for sharing data, personalization, focus on behavior, dynamic adaptive experiences. Those are some of the drivers, I think, to be really looking at. And when you apply those kinds of filters to the broad array, as consultants, as everybody sort of starts to apply these filters to the range of solutions out there, the number of viable solutions that are available shrinks pretty dramatically. And I think that's where we want to go.
Perfect. Well, I think that brings us to a close from a questions perspective. It's been really, really great to just pick your brain a little bit. Thank you so much for all of these nuggets. And as I mentioned earlier, we will follow up with this recording. Anything else that you need, you know where to reach us. Thank you, Dr. O.
Thank you, Carol.